And this is the Q&A podcast, and I'm your host, Peter Slen. Thanks for joining us. Our guest this week is Senior Trade Advisor to President Trump, Peter Navarro, who's written a book about his 4 months in prison for contempt of Congress. That conversation starts shortly. As prisoner number 04370-510, Peter Navarro spent 4 months in a minimum security prison in Miami. He had been convicted of 2 counts of contempt of Congress. In his new book, I Went to Jail So You Don't Have to, Mr. Navarro writes, quote, "When the ruling elite decide to silence voices that challenge their narrative, no one is safe, not even those closest to the highest office in our land." The title of the book is I Went to Jail So You Don't Have to. The author is Senior Trade Advisor to President Trump, Peter Navarro, and our conversation begins now. Peter Navarro, what does the number 04371-510 mean to you?
That's my inmate number in the federal prison system. And a funny story there, when you went, wherever you went, if you couldn't recite that number, you were in big trouble. And the first couple of times, I was like a little bit of a deer in the headlights there, okay? And but that's, I'm going to get a tattoo of that, besides my MAGA tattoo that I got in prison that nobody will ever see. Just kidding.
Why were you in prison?
I was in prison for defending the constitutional separation of powers and the doctrine of executive privilege. It's really important for people to understand this because my case, U.S. versus Peter Navarro, is still on appeal. And within a half a mile or so where we're sitting, that case will be adjudicated first in the appeals court in D.C. and then almost certainly to the Supreme Court. Here's what's at stake here. For more than 50 years, the Department of Justice, across party lines, had a policy of what's called absolute testimonial immunity, which is to say that when a senior White House advisor, such as myself, received a subpoena from the legislative branch, it was our duty to refuse that subpoena. And the reason is George Washington's doctrine of executive privilege, which the Supreme Court has repeatedly said is necessary to provide, quote, candor and confidentiality in presidential decision-making. You simply can't be forcing presidential advisors or the president himself to be running over to the Hill and revealing the sensitive conversations if you're going to have effective presidential decision-making. So the rock and a hard place I was put in was they formed a committee on Capitol Hill, J6, and I received a subpoena. And I had been in the administration. I'm one of only 3 White House advisors in the Trump administration who served the whole 4 years, which is kind of interesting in and of itself. But it's relevant here because I saw close to a dozen of my compadres get subpoenas while we were in the first term. And every time they refused, every time the White House legal counsel, Pat Cipollone, would write a letter which would come through the Justice Department saying, we are refusing the subpoenas on the grounds of executive privilege, absolute testimonial immunity. So I was trained and learned that it was my duty to do exactly what I did. But it's an impossible position to be put in because you have to basically put yourself at risk of prison, up to 2 years in prison, or you go and disobey your oath of office and testify. Now, what happened in my case is extraordinary. I'm the first person that was ever prosecuted for this, first one certainly ever convicted of it. And everybody who was responsible on my long road to prison was of the Democrat Party. It started with a House majority vote on party lines to hold me in contempt. It went to the Justice Department, Merrick Garland, Matt Graves, Elizabeth Lloyd, John Crabb. Those were the individuals, all Democrats. It went to a Democrat-appointed judge, Amit Mehta, and in D.C., if you're going to have a jury, it's all Democrat by the way they draw from the jury pool. And then 2 appeals court judges, Democrats, wouldn't allow me out on appeal, which was quite extraordinary because it's almost certainly granted. So it's an extraordinary case, and the Department of Justice had to reverse 50 years of policy in order to prosecute me. And if I lose that appeal, sir, every senior White House advisor going forward, whether they're Democrat or Republican, will have to face the same Hobson's choice I did. Obey your oath of office, maybe go to prison, or bend the knee to the legislative branch and dishonor your oath of office and destroy executive privilege.
You were convicted on 2 contempts of Congress charges, correct? By ignoring, does that mean you ignored 2 subpoenas?
I didn't ignore them. I got them, and I said executive privilege. I cannot come because of executive privilege. Now, the other things that's extraordinary here is, and this is part of my appeal, what I did repeatedly was say, look, I'm happy to come talk to you. All you have to do is go to President Trump and ask him to waive the privilege. I said that repeatedly to the J6 committee. I said that repeatedly to Elizabeth Alloy, John Crabb, and Garland and Graves once they began moving towards indicting me. And not a single time, sir, not a single time did they go to the president and ask him to waive the privilege. And that in itself was criminal. So I had no choice. I took a principled stand, and I spent 4 months of my life in a federal prison away from my fiancée at the age of 74 years old, which is towards the end of one's lifespan. And they took that away from me and my fiancée, because part of the book, I Went to Prison So You Won't Have To, is really a tale about her struggles when I was inside and she was on the outside. The message is simply that families do the time with you. So that's what the Democrats did. They didn't just go after me. They went after her. And to the point of, again, this is documented in, it starts off the I Went to Prison So You Won't Have To. I mean, the first chapter is Bonnie and I going to Reagan Airport.
June 3rd, 2022.
Going to Reagan Airport on our way to Nashville to do Mike Huckabee's show. One of the happiest days of our relationship. We were having a great time. We walk in the gangway, closes behind me. I see in front of me this FBI agent, Walter Giardina. He's got 4 other armed FBI agents. And I wind up in leg irons and handcuffs. She winds up getting perp walked.
At Reagan National Airport.
Unforgivable. Because literally 2 days before, I had reached out to them and said, hey, look, if you need me, just call me. There's got to be a modus vivendi here. Would you just call the president?
Modus vivendi?
A way of solving what you need and what I have a responsibility for. I literally used that term in the note that I sent. They look, and the funny thing about it is, I mean, you're a Washingtonian. I literally live at the time across the street from the FBI. From my window, I could see right into their windows. I was a field goal kicker back in the day here in the D.C. area at BCC. I could kick a field goal and hit their balcony, right? They could have called me. They didn't. So this was, I mean, people watching this need to understand that this was politics. It was lawfare, which is the weaponization of our justice system. And I'm just one of many who has been the target, just tragically, we just had Charlie Kirk assassinated. We had the president 2 attempts on his life, and 4 times in 4 different courts they tried to put him in prison. Steve Bannon went to prison. It was all partisan as a way of harming us in one way. And I was with Rudy Giuliani just a few days ago at 9/11 for the reading of the names, which they do every year. And he's been bankrupted by this whole process. So the question is, what are they doing? And I wrote, "I went to prison so you won't have to," as a wake-up call. It was a tagline from my speech at the Republican National Committee. And you can't make this up. I made it the night of the day I got out of prison. I literally walked out of prison in Prison Greens, and I wound up on the stage that night with my fiance. And the message of "I went to prison so you won't have to" is simply, look, if they can do it to me, they can do it to anybody here in America, okay, regardless of party. And that's the problem here.
And you write, when the ruling elite decide to silence voices that challenge their narrative, no one is safe, not even those closest to the highest office in our land.
That is exactly right. And my view is that in order to extricate ourselves from what is going to become a spiral upward in lawfare, where one side goes after the other, there has to be some kind of accountability. The case gets interesting. Just yesterday, there was a hearing on the Hill, which C-SPAN covered, where Senator Chuck Grassley revealed just another part of what the whistleblowers have been revealing about the FBI. I mean, I grew up loving the FBI, thinking the FBI was great, but I mean, there's so many bad apples that were part of going after me, going after Donald Trump, going after everybody I know. And this guy, Walter Giardina, okay, FBI agent, yes.
And you refer to the FBI agents as, quote, good Nazis.
Good Nazis, yes. And this whole I mean, the knee-jerk kind of politically correct thing I get out there from whether it's TV hosts or whether it's politicians or whatever. Well, just a lot of good agents in the FBI. Well, I'll tell you, sir, every one of them kept their mouth shut when they went after Donald Trump at Mar-a-Lago and they went after me. Now some whistleblowers are coming out saying exactly what happened. And again, it's like, what's going on here? Like the FBI, this guy Giardina is fascinating because he's the fulcrum around which every operation that was designed to take Donald Trump down, he was part of it. He was the guy, if you know this, the Steele dossier, the Russia hoax. It's a fake dossier. Everybody knows that. That's fact. Hillary Clinton's campaign paid for it. Giardina was the guy who greenlit it as being real, and that started the whole ball of wax going. So he was Crossfire Hurricane, Arctic Frost, Crimson River, the Mueller report. And these are the people who went after me, and they were good Nazis. They did what they were told, and they liked doing it. In fact, Grassley, there's this great thing he shows, like elation on an email chain when they decided they were going to be able to take me down. That's wrong.
Well,
that's not America.
Let's give our viewers a timeline here. June 2nd, 2022, you were indicted. June 3rd, you were arrested at Reagan Airport. We've talked about that a little. The trial was September 5th through 7 of 2023.
Yes.
So now we're a year and some months later. You were sentenced on January 25th, 2024. Yeah. And then you were in prison March 19th through July 17th, 2024. That's about 2 years.
Yeah,
that's 2 full years.
And almost a couple $1 million. Okay. They took away. Yeah, it's like I got look. This story. It's like 3 stories. Is about really one story is about what's it like to go to prison for a misdemeanor when you firmly believe you did nothing wrong and wind up with 200 felons. I mean, I was the only guy here in that prison who, 2 things. Only guy who served a misdemeanor. Everybody else was a felon. I'm the only one who served their full prison term. Okay? Now why is that? Because the head of the Bureau of Prisons, Bernadette Peters, basically decided that she wasn't going to allow me the benefits of the First Step Act and the Second Chance Act. She kept me behind bars an extra 42 days. And this is the kind of stuff was going on.
We'll get into that.
Yeah.
In your book, you
Yeah.
talk about March 19th, 2024. You held a press conference that day. Let's
Yes.
watch a little bit of this.
Okay.
I'm pissed. That's what I'm feeling right now. But I'm also afraid of only one thing. I'm afraid for this country, because what they're doing should have a chilling effect on every American, regardless of their party. If they come for me, they can come for you.
Peter Navarro, where were you there, and where were you taken?
That was the mall parking lot across the street from the Miami Federal Prison, which I was going in within about 20 minutes. You mentioned one other date of being convicted. There's a great story in the book that boils down to the fact, and I never thought this could happen in America. I wasn't allowed a defense by the time that I got to the jury. The judge, Ahmed Mehta, bad man.
You call him the cleverest of jackals.
The
in your
cleverest
book.
of jackals. Every time we filed a motion for whatever it was, for discovery to figure out why and who decided to actually indict me when they let two other guys go unindicted, Dan Scavino, Mark Meadows, for this identical set of actions. What was that going on? To the other end, where when he decides to throw me in prison upon conviction, what you usually do is you allow people to remain free pending appeal if there are significant constitutional issues, which there undeniably are. He himself said it. He was in uncharted territory. So this man, this jackal, stripped me of every possible defense using clever legal rhetoric, always giving the interpretation he wanted, so that I couldn't even argue to the jury. This is incredible. I couldn't even argue to the jury anything about executive privilege. If I said the word executive privilege in that courtroom, I would have been held in contempt again and put right in prison right then. So what's going on here? So anyway, there's that story. I went to prison so you won't have to, about kind of my legal battles, but it gets really interesting once I get inside and stories begin to unfold.
First of all, is Judge Mehta still on the D.C. Circuit?
Yes, he
Does he
is.
still sit there?
Yes, and I believe that he's one of a kind, like the appeals court judges who also denied me appeal, Cornelia Pollard and Patricia Millett. They all want to be Supreme Court judges. They all curry favor. Mehta has a fantasy about being the first Indian American to be on the Supreme Court, and everything he does is political. And if you don't believe me, start with the fact that he was a bundler. You know what a bundler is? He was a bundler for Barack Obama's campaign. And he bundles money, Barack Obama gets elected, and soon thereafter, we get another politician in black robes, basically just ignoring the constitutional separation of powers.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment. As somebody convicted of a misdemeanor, not a violent crime, was Miami Federal Correction Institute a so-called club fed?
Yes, no. Okay? Yes, no. And when I say yes, that's what the perception is. But it was as far from being a club fed as you can get from club fed. It's very interesting. I get in there and it's like I thought I'd be in Maryland or somewhere around here, and I report to Miami, and it's because my permanent residence is in Palm Beach. So I wind up in Miami, and I get calls, and it's like, "You're in for a hard time, brother." And I said, "What's going on?" Well, it's supposed to be what's called a camp, like a minimum security, right?
Minimum or low, are those the same things?
Yeah, minimum, which is a camp, which is not supposed to have any wire, and it's supposed to be somewhere where the boundaries between freedom and prison are essentially low, so people can adjust, right? It's pure barbed wire. And I was in with...
you were in the minimum security, correct?
The minimum, but it effectively was a low security one. And what you had was some white collar crime, okay? But you also had a large number of people who were in there for drug offenses, most of which involved guns as well. And you had a lot of people who would come down, you work your way through the system from the medium down to the low to the minimum if you're good behavior. But these were like bad dudes, right? So this was no Club Fed. There's a funny chapter in there about the coldest summer I ever spent was a summer in a Miami federal prison. And it was like it's like this thing. I went to prison, so you won't have to. It's like part Kafka. Okay, there's certainly that. Part Stephen King, certainly that. But you got a lot of the Joseph Heller kind of funny stuff going on, just absurdities. And I'm in this dorm with about 50 other guys. Now, that in and of itself, people think you're in a dorm rather than a cell. It's like everybody told me there that they'd rather be in a cell because only you don't have to worry about one other guy. You know, there's a thing called the lock in the sock, right? You take a padlock, you throw it in a sock, and you know, a lot of rough justice goes on like that. So anyway, the dorm, I get there the first day, and it's like 58 degrees. I'm going, the hell's going on? Lightning had hit and burned out the thermostat. So instead of replacing the thermostat for $100, they spend like $3,000 extra a month running the air conditioners full time. And I'm freezing, you know, like stuff like that, like funny stuff. I mean, it was like darkly funny. It wasn't funny getting COVID, which ran around the dorms. You know, you'd hear one guy down the bunk row cough, and you knew like within a week or two you're going to get that.
Peter Navarro, did the other prisoners or inmates know who you were before you came in?
That's a funny story too. Yeah, they were. In fact, they knew I was going to that prison 2 weeks before I did, and the reason why they knew is because the warden put them all to work doing like a Potemkin village to the prison, right? They got out there with their paint brushes, they replaced some lights, tried to kill all the cockroaches. The rats in the kitchen kind of laughed at them because they were still there. And it was like, they were thankful I got there. One of the first things they said, "Oh, thanks, the food's so much better since they knew you were coming." And I'm thinking to myself, if the food's better, it must have been really bad because that was another thing.
What was the food like? What would you have?
Well, first of all, I'll tell you what I didn't have. I'm sitting in Miami, the heart of the citrus capital of the world, right? And you could not get a grapefruit or orange in prison.
Why?
And why? Because inmates would use things like fresh fruit as distilleries to make hooch, okay? And so because they couldn't police that, they just didn't buy anything. I mean, I didn't eat a fresh vegetable the whole time I was there. The calories are constrained. I mean, I dropped probably 12 pounds, and I don't have 12 pounds to drop. The nutrition's obviously horrible. I mean, I'm not one of these guys like I'm tough on crime, okay? It's like, okay. But on the other hand, like, you should at least abide by the national guidelines for your nutrition. There's stories, I saved the guy's life there. I mean, there's a story about that because of how they treated people and stuff.
And, well, tell that story. And was it because you were a former Trump advisor that you were able to get the word to the warden?
That's exactly right. I mean, I took risks there. After a little while I was there, I'd see things and I'd say stuff. And I could do that. It was risky because I just as easily could have been taken over to what they call the shoe on the other side where the higher security prison was, and never to be seen again. You know, if they put you in the shoe.
You mean for speaking out?
Yeah, they could have done that, okay? And they had their own calculus about how far they wanted to push that. I mean, the warden there, and Bernadette Peters, the head of the BOP, she wouldn't let Matt Gaetz, a congressman, come see me. He said I was too notorious. So but I was, look, at my age, it's like, I speak my piece. So this guy, big, tall Puerto Rican guy who spoke no English, tough SOB. You'd see him out on the playground playing basketball, and he was like a work of art. He could hit three-pointers better than Michael Jordan could in the day. And people, you know, they gave him space and stuff like that. He came to me one night about, I don't know, I think it was 6 o'clock at night with an interpreter. And he looks about 8 months pregnant with bloating. And he's got tears in his eyes begging me to do something. And I'm working with the interpreter. I'm saying, what's going on here? And it's like, he went to the guard on duty and asked him for an ambulance and some help here. The guy blew him off, gave him some Tylenol, which that's not going to do any good at all. So it was like, okay, fine. I got to go over to the guard down the hall, get there, and he's going, hey, what are you on? It's like, look, I just told him, I said, look, you got a choice here, okay? You either get this guy immediately to the hospital or he dies on your watch, perhaps, okay? You make the choice, but it's on you. He was gone in 20 minutes. He had surgery that night for 3 hernias. He probably would have died if he had hung around another day or two from all the complications that were going on his side. And that's the kind of stuff, I mean, there was a guy in there, they wouldn't give another PSA blood test for his prostate because it was going up too fast, and they didn't want to have to pay for what might be some medical treatment. I had the guy next to me, Dale Gowing, fascinating stories about him. He was a Vietnam vet who had represented some of the guys from the Lieutenant Cali My Lai thing. Served with distinction. He should have been gone 5 years ago from that prison. You know, he was there. I settled fights between Mad Dog and the guy I call Mini Me. I mean, it's just the prison life. You want to know what's go to prison? Read I Went to Prison So You Won't Have to. That's part of the story.
And you often use ethnic divisions.
Yeah.
In your book, you talk about the Puerto Rican section
Yes.
of the dorm.
Yeah.
Was that important? The ethnic divisions?
Well, prisons are societies, right? And they tended to be organized by groups. You know, the Haitians had a group to protect themselves. The Puerto Ricans. The thing about what's so fascinating about Puerto Ricans, is that there's no prisons. There's no federal prisons in Puerto Rico, which it's like stunning. The reason is it's so corrupt down there that they can't run them effectively. So the Puerto Ricans wind up in U.S. prisons, mainland prisons, and a lot of them in Miami because they're nearby. And within the Puerto Ricans themselves, there's 2 factions. There's the Nieta and there's the other faction. They go at each other, right? You just out in the yard, you see things. I was like Switzerland. You know, I freely interacted with everybody. Had good friends among all the groups. There's a funny story in the book of why initially when I came in they left me alone, because this guy comes up to me and it's like in broken English. He says, "You're a good guy." And it's like, well, you know, okay, why? It's like, because you didn't snitch, right?
The old adage, snitches get stitches.
Yeah, and
is there some truth to that?
There's plenty of truth, because there's, again, this is the humor in the book is things like me writing in the diary. Remember, it's like I'm doing a daily diary in hand, trying to like smuggle the stuff out of prison because I didn't know whether I could do it or not, whatever. But it's like I make a comment like, what's the moral equivalence of me standing up for the Constitution of separation of powers and refusing to testify for that because of my oath of office, and not snitching on your buddies in your gang, right? So, but there's a funny, the sad thing about it was that guy who said to me he trusted me because I wasn't a snitch would later on in the narrative, as I'm there, reprise the great scene from Platoon at the end where the guy is running away from the Viet Cong and they're trapping him. And I watched this guy basically have to try to run out of the dorm because he had been accused of being a snitch, and they were going to they weren't going to kill him because that would be over the top, but they were going to hurt him pretty bad. And so he goes out, he tries to get out, and it's like he throws himself against the fence. The guards wouldn't put him over there, and finally he had to get violent with the guards in order for them to take him over there. And these are the things it's the same fence I used to at the end of our visits every weekend when it was with my Pixie. That's my nickname for my fiancée.
For Bonnie Brenner, your co-author.
She'd come every weekend, trooper. We'd sit there for hours. At the end, though, she'd go to the parking lot, and Dale would drive her back, and we'd sit there and wave. And it was like you try to be upbeat and smile and stuff like that, but we're both smiling and waving, and our hearts are breaking. It's like.
Well, let's talk a little bit about Bonnie.
Sure.
You refer to her as a potential honeypot when you first meet her.
That's a funny story.
Why do you say that?
So I'm living in this apartment, and I'm moving down the hall to a bigger apartment because I had to do some stuff. I was out of the administration at that point, and she's in the hall, and she recognizes me and says, "Are you Peter Navarro?" And we start talking a little bit. And look, if you look at her, take a look at her, right? She's just a sweet, beautiful girl. I joke she has the best legs in Washington, D.C. And I'm thinking, like, wait a minute. And we were trained in the FBI, by the FBI, when we first went into
the Trump administration.
Into the Trump administration. It's like, if it's like too good to be true, it's probably not true, right? So I literally had to consider whether I was getting Eric Swalwell, if you know the reference. This is the congressman who continually bashes Republicans who slept with a Chinese spy and gave away secrets when he was on a national intelligence committee. I didn't want to be that guy, right? So I actually had to strongly consider that. And there's a little off-color joke in the book I'll let you guys read as to how I found out she wasn't a spy, but we'll leave it at that. But she's a trooper.
And while you were in Federal Corrections Institute, Miami, she was staying at the Doral.
She didn't stay at the Doral. What she did was we have a small condo in Palm Beach, okay, and Lake Worth, around that area, if you know it. So it's just 6 miles from the boss in Mar-a-Lago and stuff like that. Anyway, but she would drive up on the weekends. And Eric Trump was very helpful in we paid for it, but it was the family rate and stuff like that.
At the Doral.
At the Doral, she'd come up there for spend a night or two. She'd come up on Friday night, leave on Sunday. She doesn't drive, so we had to hire a car. But that's kind of interesting in and of itself, because like you can't take an Uber. It's like she couldn't take an Uber because in order to take an Uber, you had to have a phone, and you couldn't bring phones into the visitor's place, and there was no place to leave your phone. I mean, this is like the Joseph Heller kind of stuff. I'm going, what? Okay, so instead of paying for an Uber, we got to pay for that.
Just and Dale was the driver provided by
he
became
a dear friend, and he took really good care of her. But you know, the Pixie posts, I mean, this is the construction of the book it begins with some narratives and ends with my speech at the Republican National Committee. But in between, it's my handwritten diary that I wrote in there, and it's her posts, and she I mean, just this talks a lot about the separation, but also a big part of that was her experiences at the Visitors Center, which was, well, it was Heller and Kafka on steroids there. I mean, with the stuff we witnessed there.
Peter Navarro, let me read a quote from the book.
Yeah.
I would quickly learn the prison guards are like fingerprints. No two are alike.
Yeah.
Each one I would meet along the way would have their quirks, pet peeves, and styles.
Yeah.
Most of them were good to okay. Some of them were just dicks. And the ones without dicks were always the worst dicks.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah. A couple of things. Some of the guys there, they knew I didn't belong there, and they were just good people, okay? And I let me say this. We'll talk about this, but I uncovered a problem in that prison of a $5 billion magnitude about how the BOP was breaking the law there. And now that I'm on the outside, the epilogue to this whole thing is I actually solved that problem. And I've been working closely with the BOP director and things like that.
And you're talking about the Second Chance Act and the first step of it.
And we'll get to that. But this thing about, I mean, look, this is not politically correct, but that's not who I am. I don't think men belong in women's prisons. Full stop. There's just too much rape and abuse going on. I don't think women belong in men's prisons, at least based on my experience, because the women who were in that prison, who were guards, they acted like they had to have the biggest, C-SPAN, but forgive me, the biggest dicks around, because they were women. They felt like in order to get respect, they had to act tougher than the men, and it just didn't work. I remember this new guard came on. She was about, I don't know, 6 feet tall, kind of big, imposing. And for first day on the job, she comes out into the yard where guys are out there. We all got our shirts off because it's 100 degrees and we're playing basketball or doing whatever it is people are doing, or just, And she would like come up to people and just do this kind of stuff. And there was another one who ran the dreaded SIS, which ran raids on the dorms. They came in and on one raid and totally turned over my bed, turned over my locker. Contraband. And there's an interesting story in the book about that, because one of my favorite guys was this guy who had complete set of gold teeth named Zach. He was like a really good guy, hardworking. He ran the laundry and stuff like that. And he said to me one time, and he was actually right, the only thing you're looking for, you can buy in any 7-Eleven around. It's like, what's the problem here? And it was mostly cell phones. And that's a whole different topic. I mean, I get why you don't want criminals having cell phones to run their criminal networks. But on the other hand, when you restrict your minutes about how much you can talk to your family the way you do, these guys are going to break the law. So that's, so you go in, she was like, I think her name was Andino. They'd come in, the worst one they did, they came in and they smashed the tiles, broke toilets, the showers. These are like, and there weren't enough of that to go around as it was. And they like gloat because they get some cell phones, and then they lock everybody down. I mean, I was like it's like I was probably the only guy in the place that didn't have a cell phone or access to one, and I wasn't going to do that for obvious reasons. But I understood why people wanted to, and the problem is that the problem I uncovered is like when you keep people in longer than you need to, and break the law, the First Step Back law, longer than you need to, you keep them further away from their families, their job skills deteriorate, they get alienated, and they're more likely to recidivate. Try that word. That's it took me a while to say that word, but the point is that it's.
And C-SPAN's Q&A podcast continues in a moment.
Why were they being kept longer than the law?
All right, let me walk you through that, because that's an important part of the story. Remember, this is a love story. It's a lawfare story about folks coming after me. But I dare say you will never meet another person who went into federal prison, particularly for a crime that wasn't a crime prior to the time they went in, who actually identified and then solved a $5 billion problem. Here it is. First Step Act, passed in 2018 by Donald Trump and bipartisan legislation. Jared Kushner had a lot to do with getting that to the finish line. It recognized the problem of over-sentencing that had been ushered in the crack cocaine era. And it wanted to create a system of incentives for nonviolent, usually first-time offenders, to be able to reduce their sentence time if they trained and behaved themselves while they were in prison. Okay? So I find out when I get in there, first of all, I should have got out 42 days earlier. I referenced that earlier. I'm going, that's a little odd. What's going on here? And so I would, over the course of time, would form this committee with these guys. And there was two problems. Basically, the first one is the calculator, okay, the way they actually computed the First Step Act credits didn't work. It systematically understated the time you should be able to go first to a halfway house and then to home confinement by anywhere from 3 months to a year or more. Okay, now the way you get to $5 billion is three ways. You cost more. You keep people in prison longer, so you're paying more for that. You keep them out of a halfway house and out of the workforce, so you're not getting the tax revenues, so you pay more for that. And you keep them away from their families, and their families are on food stamps and housing subsidies, and you pay. It's $5 billion, okay? So the calculator was wrong, and then even when they were supposed to leave to a halfway house, there's too much undercapacity in halfway houses, so there's no room. They keep them in prison rather than send them to home confinement. Okay? Now, I get out, and it's like I solved that problem. It's like there was, that's an interesting story in and of itself. But as of this point in time, the new Bureau of Prisons director issued a new policy that fixes the calculator and says people go to home confinement if there's no halfway house capacity, okay? And then
you went to the swearing in of the new Bureau of Prisons.
I did, yes. He's a good man, but he's stuck with a bureaucracy that is still fighting him on that. And that's another story in the book that I talk about as to why these folks in the guards and this, that, and the other thing, the whole system, the people who provide food contracts and this, that, and the other thing, they want more capacity. They want more prisoners in than less because they will get more overtime. They make more money selling food and this, that, and the other thing.
Yeah, you report on food waste in prison.
Yeah.
Why is the food being wasted? What were you seeing?
Well, sometimes it's just I mean, some of the bad apples, no pun intended, in the people working there. And I just want to emphasize there was a lot of good people there, and I just admire their willingness to put their lives on the line every day in prison. That's not easy, okay? You were at risk of dying just as I was at risk of dying every day. It's no country for old men. It's no country for anybody. But you had like pricks, and I use that term. It's like these guys, it's like you go and they could lord over you. It's like there's food left. They wouldn't let you go back for seconds. There's a very funny story in the book about how they would crack down on people when we try to walk out with some extra food so that we could not starve all night and stuff like that. And there was one story about how you had a guard on the inside of the cafeteria handing out milk because it was expired, right? It was going to expire that day. And us walking out and the guards outside confiscating. There's a big, it's like a pyramid of milk cartons. And I'm talking to these guys like, what are you doing here? And it's like, I'm talking to this psychologist, and again, I'm crossing some boundaries here, but it's hard to meet a shrink or a psychologist who isn't a little bit nuts. I'm sorry, but there's something there. And she's trying to lecture me about how the broken window theory, you know, if you break these minor infractions coming out, taking food and you're not supposed to, then that's going to lead to, I don't know, you shooting somebody. I thought I get that, but the guy inside said it was okay to do it. Would you guys talk to one another here? That's like the Joseph Heller kind of catch-22 stuff. And there was stuff like that all the time. There's a funny story about Big Mike. Like, he comes into prison and he's got size 15 shoes, right? And they were in the middle of some kind of lockdown punishment for everybody. And there was like a $40 limit in the commissary, and he couldn't buy shoes because they were $50, right? And so he's walking around like in slippers, like with his toes hanging out. I mean,
you're not allowed to spend more than $40 a month?
In that case, there was something that happened, right? The lockdowns happen there all the time, right? After a raid, they lock you down, and then they punish you with the commissary stuff, like you can't buy as much, or if you get caught, they take away your commissary privilege, whatever. So for whatever reason, Mike couldn't spend $50, which he had in his account because they had set the limit at 40, for whatever reason, something like that, right? And it's like, you know, it's just
Peter Navarro,
stuff like that.
Was there a smoking section in prison? Were you allowed to smoke?
Yeah, there was a smoking section every night out in the yard when nobody was looking. People would smoke shit, and you know, sometimes it was shit. There's this stuff called K something or other. We didn't have it in my side, but on the other side, these people would smoke it, and it had bearing on me because thanks to the War Room and Greg Kelly and a lot of people out there who would remind people I was in prison, I got like thousands and thousands of pieces of mail.
Were you allowed to read them and respond?
Well, here's the punchline. More than half of it was returned because it didn't conform to prison guidelines, which is to say you had to have a certain color ink, had to be white envelopes, and if there was any kind of anything on it, that they'd send it back, right? And one of the reasons they gave was that the K stuff drug can come in on paper. But it was funny. I mean, the first day, a couple in when I'm there, the guard comes down to me, and he comes and he says, "Navarro, you got mail." Or maybe he said my number, like to go back. And and I go, "Oh, fine." I start walking there. He says, "You better bring a bag." So I grab my laundry bag, and it's like, you know, it's like Santa Claus stuff like that. And I'll tell you, I read everything. It was heartwarming. And the ones that moved me the most were from veterans, either Vietnam. There was a few from actually World War II. These are really old guys. And they were of the know, like, didn't fight for this country, for this to happen. And I'm sorry that it happened to you, stuff like that.
Donald Trump Jr.
Yeah.
came to visit you.
Yes, he did. Yeah, they let him in. They didn't dare not let him in.
But
They
not
wouldn't
Matt
keep
Gates,
in
not
yeah.
Congressman Matt Gates.
Yeah, or a guy named Dave Bossie who runs Citizen United. He wanted to do. He was doing a movie about Donald Trump, and he wanted to do some filming. And they broke the BOP. They broke laws and policy to keep these people out. Just to say that, but Don Jr. Came with a guy who would come to be one of my great friends, and he's in the administration now, doing really good job. He's the head of personnel, Sergio Gore, and what what they did was it was like a clandestine operation. The warden comes to me and says, please don't let anybody know he's coming. This, that, and the other thing. It's like fine, whatever. So Sergio and Don Jr. Come in. They took us away. It wasn't the visitor center because that would have been crazy town. They took us over and gave us some private space. Pixie, my sweetheart,
Bonnie Brenner,
was there, and we just had it was really nice. I mean, Don Jr. and Eric really treated me well, as did the boss and Susie Wiles while I was in there.
July 17th, 2024, you are released.
Yes.
Let's see video from that evening.
Yeah.
Yes, indeed. This morning I did walk out of a federal prison in Miami. Joe Biden and his Department of Injustice put me there. Tonight I'm here with you in this beautiful city of Milwaukee. I've got a very simple message for you. If they can come for me, if they can come for Donald Trump, be careful, they will come for you. If we don't control our government, their government will control us.
That's the message. That's why I wrote the book. I went to prison so you won't have to. It comes later in the speech. It should be a wake-up call. And again, C-SPAN, what I love about C-SPAN is that everybody watches it, both parties. It's not a partisan instrument. And I want to just explain to people that this is not a partisan fight here that I'm having. This was a constitutional separation of powers. In my case, sir, I need to win that to protect both parties from this lawfare thing, which is a scourge in society. But that was, I'm telling you, that was a surreal experience. And that day I was on Charlie Kirk's show as well. Okay, the man means a lot to me, and to have him assassinated, he's the worst of what they've done to us. But it's a lot of people that have suffered. I mean, everybody I served with in the first Trump White House has been a target of lawfare, and at a minimum they've had to pay hundreds of thousands of dollars or millions of dollars in legal fees just to stay out of jail. The other end of the spectrum, Charlie's dead. And then you got a lot of things in between there, sir. It's wrong.
Peter Navarro, you are serving again in the second Trump administration,
Yes,
correct? What are you doing?
I'm in the same office I had the first term, which I help the boss create manufacturing jobs for working class Americans. I'm the senior counselor for trade manufacturing.
Have you used your experience, your 4 months in prison, to enact or push for prison reform of some type?
I've done that as a sidelight. Okay, it's certainly not part of my official duties in the White House, but at the same time, I was active in the search for what turned out to be a really good Bureau of Prisons director. I remember, funny story, I'm sitting in my office. They came visit me because I wanted to solve this model problem so we could calculate the First Step Back credit. So Bill Marshall comes in with Rick Stover, who's like the guy BOP in charge, and he brings in this guy named Andy Black. And he's like the Wizard of Oz, right? Because when you take the curtain back, one guy in the Bureau of Prisons, this guy Andy Black, was making all of the calculations for everybody in that prison. And it took about 10 seconds to figure out why it was screwed up. He's running an old IBM mainframe. It's like crazy stuff. So I bring in this guy, Marco Elise, Doge guy, and it's like we're getting it out of the mainframe into the cloud, gonna run like a Ferrari instead of a Model T. And it's not rocket science. I could literally sit in prison, and I did this many times. It's like, you're a prisoner. I say to you, sir, you come to me, bring me your sheet. Okay, so he'd go get the sheet. He's got all his data. It took me like 9 minutes to figure out. I said, well, you should have been at a halfway house on this date. You should have been in home confinement on this date. You should have been released on this date. And the guy looked at me, he says, that was 6 months ago. Or that was 9 months ago. I said, yeah, you're getting screwed. And that's because of guys like Andy Black. And a funny story with him, we're in the middle of reforming that model. He's on a chat with Marco and these other guys, right? And he's talking to one of his colleagues, and he's bragging to one of his colleagues about how they're going to stop us, Marco and the new head, from messing with the model and fixing it. And he didn't realize Marco was looking at the chat, right? So he's gone.
There are people watching this interview who are going to say, he was in the White House, Harvard PhD. Yeah. He did 4 months in low security or minimum security. It's a blip.
It's a blip, yeah. Well, 74 years old, no country for old men. It's probably shaved a few years off my life. I mean, that's kind of how it works. You know, it's you're on a starvation diet. You're not getting your proper nutrition. Got COVID twice and never had it before. And I was in situations where I could just have easily been hurt or killed. So I snow camp. But I think that's not the point. The point is, how did I get there? I mean, what's that all about? All I did, I mean, even the judge in my case said he believed that I believed I was doing my duty. And he still did what he did. I mean, it's unforgivable. Ahmed Mater, okay? The story's, here's another thing that's interesting. It's like my appeal's ongoing. It's like the Department of Justice just took back their case against me at the appeals court. Right? They reverted to the 50 years of policy which said I never should have been prosecuted. It's like, how's the appeals court going to deal with that? How's the Supreme Court going to deal with that? They need to settle. There's a term of art in the law. You got to settle good law. Okay? Question is, does Congress have the right to subpoena someone from the executive branch who's a senior White House advisor? The answer, up until the time I went to prison, was no with an exclamation point. They got to settle that. Otherwise, everybody's at risk. And there's a few other interesting ones in there.
Prisoner number 04371-510, Peter Navarro, is the author, along with Bonnie Brenner, of this book, I Went to Jail So You Don't Have to, A Love and Lawfare Story in Trumpland.
Yeah.
Thank you for spending an hour with us.
They never put the dash in when they made me say it. It's been a pleasure talking to you, sir, and I do hope people will read the book. They'll laugh, they'll cry, they'll get a little angry, but it's a good book from the heart, and I think people will enjoy it. I went to prison, so you won't have to. All right, my brother.
Next week on this podcast, our guest is journalist Emily Baker White, whose new book is about TikTok. It's called Every Screen on the Planet.